Joseph Helt was a typical 17-year-old who enjoyed listening to heavy metal and the outdoors. A typical teenager who enjoyed all the things that rebellious teens loved: art, loud music, and parties. Joseph also enjoyed being in the company of his close friends. Joseph and his friends enjoyed getting together near bonfires, as well as being in the company of other teens at nearby house parties. That's why his mother didn't find it unusual when, on the night of January 16, 1987, Joseph decided to drive over to a nearby party with his friends. Despite the warnings of a weather snowstorm approaching, Joseph and his friends were still adamant on making the drive over to hang out and party with other friends. Nothing seemed unusual until Joseph Helt failed to return to work on the following day. Joseph Helt's boss called Joseph's mother that Saturday evening to ask about his failure to return to work. Joseph Helt's mother knew that it was common for Joseph not to return home, being out with friends all night, but to miss work was very uncharacteristic of him to do so, as Joseph rarely ever missed work. Joseph Helt had been currently working at the auction barn, which at the time had only been open on weekends. So why didn't he appear to work? Witnesses had stated that the 17-year-old had been hanging out at an abandoned ski lodge, formerly known as Mount Cathalia. The teens frequented this area since it was turned into a popular hangout spot for them. Sometime around the early hours of January 17, 1987, Joseph Helt, along with 3 friends, were ready to leave the party. They intended to have a quick late-night, early morning drive while riding in Joseph's friend's car. At some point during their drive, the vehicle got stuck in snow near Sam's Point Road. This road winds through a presence near the Shawangunk Ridge. After several attempts to get the car out of the snow, it was said that Joseph walked down a mountain alone in an effort to find help. It had been during the early morning hours, so it was still dark outside. This was the last time that Joseph was ever seen again. Joseph Helt's family quickly filed a missing persons report shortly after Joseph's mother received the call that he had not went to work that Saturday evening. As the snow kept getting progressively worse outside, Joseph's family began to grow increasingly worried. Police searched through miles and miles of land, but to no avail. Tracking dogs and helicopters were used to try to find Joseph's whereabouts, even with the frigid January weather not letting up. Weeks quickly turned into months while police continued to search for Joseph, but were still unable to find him. Did Joseph fall off a mountain? Did he fall into a deep crevice that made it hard to spot because of the ongoing snowstorm? Or were 2 of Joseph's friends involved in Joseph's disappearance? Many people speculated that it was quite possible that Joseph's friends had something to do with his disappearance, since they were both quick to abandon the vehicle and head home shortly after Joseph didn't return back to the car. However, police believe that there was a high possibility that foul play was not the cause for Joseph's disappearance. Although it's a possibility, investigators have not completely ruled out foul play. Several years have passed, with no proof or evidence of what happened to Joseph that night. It was like he disappeared from the face of the earth. Family and friends still remain hopeful that they would one day find out what really happened to Joseph. On the early morning hours of January 17, 1987, Joseph Helt was last seen wearing a camouflage jacket, a gray hooded sweatshirt, a long-sleeve thermal shirt, and white high-top tennis shoes. He stands at 5'9", and at the time of his disappearance weighed in at around 150 pounds. He has blonde hair and brown eyes. If you have any information on the disappearance of Joseph Helt, please call New York State authorities at 845-626-2800. That's 845-626-2800. You can also contact the Center for Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678. That's 1-800-843-5678. Refer to case number 115-0362. That's case number 115-0362. You can remain anonymous.
Only at night.
Gary and Stephanie were a married couple that loved each other dearly. So when their wedding day had finally approached, they, along with Gary Gillette's 3 daughters, were ecstatic to know Stephanie Gillette would be their new stepmother. Gary Gillette already had 3 children from a previous marriage, but the children loved her. Christy, the middle child, enjoyed visiting Stephanie and her dad whenever she could. She remembers how much of a kind-hearted person she was and felt that Stephanie's personality made her a beautiful person inside and out. It was Friday the 13th, 1985. The children were getting ready to head over to Gary and Stephanie Gillette's house. It was Gary's turn to take the children, so they were ready to help Stephanie put up some Christmas decorations. Shay remembers wanting to go out with her friends the night that her father Gary called to let the girls know that he'll pick them up on the following day, since both Gary and his wife Stephanie had plans to attend a Christmas party later that night. On the following day, Gary's daughters had been anxiously waiting for their father to arrive, but to no avail. Shay immediately thought of stopping by her dad's house to check up on the newlywed couple, since she had planned to go to the movies with her other friends near her father's home in Corpus Christi. Shay had immediately noticed that all of the lights at her father's house were on through one of the windows. Shay also noticed that the garage door was wide open, but didn't see a trace of her father Gary, nor did she see Stephanie. On that same day, Shay had decided to return back home to Portland with a bad feeling in her stomach. On the following day, both Shay and her mother Debbie decided to stop at Gary's house back in Corpus Christi one last time. Once they neared the house, they were bombarded by several police cars, news reporters, and medical personnel. They would soon discover that both her father Gary and stepmother Stephanie were both viciously stabbed in their bedroom. The autopsy would later reveal that both Gary and Stephanie Gillette suffered multiple stab wounds made by a knife and a hatchet. Investigators would later report that Gary's car was missing and was later found blocks away near Wimbledon Drive. Reports were made of a fingerprint being found on the car, but years later, when it was tested, no match had been available. Multiple fingerprints were found at Gary and Stephanie's house, but only one had been clear enough to use at processing. Gary's daughters all believe that one of the main suspects is said to be a man claiming to have been close friends of both Gary and Stephanie. The girls believed that this individual had grown jealous of Gary, so as a way of releasing his personal hatred against him, killed both Gary and his wife Stephanie as a means of retaliating against him. The girls also keep stressing the fact that they didn't ever remember meeting this man, much less having him as Gary and Stephanie's pallbearer at their wedding. The girls claim that if this individual was indeed a close friend of both Gary and Stephanie Gillette, that they would have known about him. Till this day, this individual remains as a person of interest, but refuses to speak to authorities. Gary's daughters still advocate for both her father and stepmother, speaking to crime podcasts and other crime-related outlets in order to keep the word alive on finding Gary and Stephanie's killer. If you have any information on the murders of Gary and Stephanie Gillette, please contact the Corpus Christi Police Department at 361-886-2600. That's 361-886-2600. 2600. You can remain anonymous. On February 28, 1983, the body of a young African American girl was found murdered in an abandoned apartment building on Clemens Avenue. Two men had stopped near the abandoned apartment building in the hopes of finding scrap metal used to fix their car that had broke down near the area. Once both men walked into the abandoned apartment building, one of the men lit up a cigarette. The cigarette light flickered above the headless body of a young girl. Soon after, both men called authorities. At first glance, they believed the murder victim to be that of a young woman, but upon further examination of the corpse, pathologists determined that the body was that of an 8 to 11-year-old child that hadn't gone through puberty yet. Little Jane Doe had 2 coats of red nail polish on and was found face down wearing only a distinctive yellow sweater. The yellow sweater had been covered in blood, and the area in which her head was cut off had been growing mold inside of it, leading investigators to believe that she had remained there for several days before she was found. Her hands were tied behind her back with a distinctive red and white cord, and forensic investigators believe that St. Louis Jane Doe was strangled, and her head was cleanly cut off by a large blade suspected to be that of a carving knife. Her head was never found, although fingerprints have been collected. In 2013, her body was exhumed, and all evidence of St. Louis Jane Doe was put into the DNA database. The only clue so far is that St. Louis Jane Doe was known to have spent her living years near the northeastern and midwestern states. A possible match leading to West Virginia. She was estimated to have weighed between 70 to 80 pounds and had spina bifida. A possible suspect was killer and child molester Vernon Brown, who was known to have murdered a young 9-year-old girl the same way St. Louis Jane Doe was found. The murder victim's head severed. Vernon Brown was executed in 2005 and never confessed to St. Louis Jane Doe. Although they were both killed the same way, some believe that St. Louis Jane Doe's murder was a bit too sophisticated for Vernon Brown, since his IQ was below average. If you have any information on the murder of little St. Louis Jane Doe, please call the St. Louis Police Department at 314-444-5822. That's 314-444-5822. Or the St. Louis City Medical Examiner's Office at 314-622-4971. That's 314-622-4971. You can remain anonymous. Sylvia Baker was a beautiful young mother of 2 young children, 8-year-old Kelsey and 2-year-old Alina. Aside from being the mother of 2 children, Sylvia was also a very intelligent and driven young woman. Sylvia Baker worked 2 jobs and also studied at Hartford Community College, now known as Capital Community College in Hartford, Connecticut. On the night of July 17, 1982, Sylvia Baker had been preparing to throw away the trash, planning to leave her children alone at the house for a brief moment. Kelsey, the older sibling, was watching TV in the living room, while 2-year-old Alina had been sound asleep in her bedroom. While Sylvia never took too long throwing out the trash, she took a bit longer to head back inside on this specific day. 8-year-old Kelsey grew worried until he looked outside his window and saw his mother speaking to a small group of people outside. At that moment, 8-year-old Kelsey's fears disappeared, and Kelsey, not knowing that he will never get to see his mother Sylvia ever again. Witnesses near Sylvia's apartment complex on Cizon Avenue remember seeing Sylvia approaching a blue van that had pulled up. Inside the van were a few men and women known to Sylvia. All that's known is that the van eventually drives off with Sylvia inside. On the following day, children playing near a pond on Kelsey Park find the body of a naked woman. That woman is Sylvia Baker. Sylvia was partially submerged in the water, with her wrists and ankles bound with red and white torn seersucker material, and her eyes were covered with a blindfold. Several yards away from where Sylvia was found, police find a wallet. The wallet belonged to a man that had claimed to have dropped it when he walked over to the pond to inspect the body after he heard about the crime scene near his home. Sylvia Baker's mother, Ethel Logans, says that she grew concerned with her daughter after she later joined a quote-unquote strange new religion. The strange new religion is now called Rastafarianism. Sylvia's mother, Ethel, believes that whatever happened inside of that blue van had to do with her daughter objecting to some kind of sketchy activities going on inside of the van, and as a result, was probably forced out of the van and killed. Investigators, however, find no connection with Rastafarianism playing a part in Sylvia's murder, since this belief system wasn't well known back then. Investigators continued to interrogate a few of her former boyfriends but found no connection leading them to an arrest. During the time of Sylvia Baker's murder, there appeared to be a string of murders near the Hartford, Connecticut area, as many as 17 murders of young women that were being killed at night. This leads investigators to believe that there can quite possibly be a connection between Sylvia Baker's murder and the murders of the young women. Although some were ruled out as unrelated, there has been a possibility that some of the other murders near the neighboring Connecticut towns might be related, since some of the other victims were killed in the same fashion: strangulation and sexual assault. On November 27, 1988, the body of 22-year-old Patricia Thompson was found near the Vine Street entrance to Kenny Park, the same park where Sylvia Baker's body was found a few years prior. Carla Terry, who was 28 years of age, who lived near Kenny Park, was found dead on January 13, 1991 at the Mark Twain Drive extension in Hartford. 15-year-old Tamika Mayo of Hartford was found dead near Rocky Hill, all three assaulted and strangled to death. Their bodies were said to have been moved. In 1987, 29-year-old Mary Shirley of Hartford was found dead behind a stone wall off Old Route 2. Although her body was too badly decomposed to connect her killing with that of Sylvia Baker's, authorities still believe there to be a connection, since the area where she was found was not too far from where all the other women were found. Although there has been a person of interest, the individual having close ties to all victims except for the mention of Sylvia Baker, the suspect was later released due to insufficient evidence. However, in September of 1993, the alleged suspect, Swinton, was later interviewed, referring the said killer and his actions in first person. Some saw this as an indirect confession. Swinton was later arrested in connection to Terry's murder in 1998, but was later released due to DNA evidence exclusion and inconclusive findings. If you have any information on the murder of Sylvia Baker or any of the other murder victims mentioned in this story, please call 1-866-623-8058. That's 1-866-623-8058. You can also reach the Connecticut Cold Case Unit at cold.case@ct.gov. That's cold.case@ct.gov. Or by mail at P.O. Box 962, Rocky Hill, Connecticut 06067. That's P.O. Box 962, Rocky Hill, Connecticut 06067. You can remain anonymous.